Howdy! Welcome to Aspire Mountain Academy. I'm Professor Curtis, your instructor for this course in Introductory Statistics. In less than 10 minutes, this video demonstrates how to construct sampling distribution tables in Excel. Let's get started. I've mentioned earlier in the course that there are going to be times when you can actually work a problem in StatCrunch or Excel, and some people find it easier to do it one way, some people find it easier to do the other way. So I'll show you how to do it both ways, and then you can select for yourself which way is easier for you. So for those of you who find it easier to use Excel than StatCrunch, this mini lecture is for you. Now, notice how we're going to look at exactly the same problem we saw in the previous mini lecture. So same population, same sample size, selecting with replacement. We're again asked to find the value of the population standard deviation, a probability distribution table, the mean of the sampling distribution for the sample statistic, and then asked, does the sample statistic target the population parameter? So we're going to look at how to solve the same problem using Excel. So the first part asked, find the value of the population standard deviation. So once you have this data actually in Excel, you can use the stevdev.p function to calculate it. So here in Excel, we've got the actual data. It's been dumped in, and I just come down to this cell here and then just typed in the actual function and then just put in the actual number for the population. It's small enough population, you can just type the values in. You don't need to reference any additional cells. Notice this is different from the stevdev function, which is normally used. Again, this is what we saw earlier in StatCrunch, that there's an unadjusted standard deviation for the population. That's what the .p is for, to tell Excel it's for the population. And then another one for the actual sample itself. So make sure you use the proper function to calculate out the number that's being asked for. So here's our population standard deviation, and you can see it's the same number that we got earlier when we used StatCrunch. So again, you can do this in StatCrunch. I like Excel a little bit in this regard because you have to put the values in a separate column and then run the functionality through the menus. Here in Excel, I just select my cell, type in the function with the numbers, and boom, there's my answer. Now, the second part of this problem asks us to find the standard deviation for each of the 9 samples and then summarize it in a probability distribution table. So this is going to go through the same process that we saw with StatCrunch with a little bit of difference. In Excel, you have to calculate a separate standard deviation for each of the rows of your data table. We can do that pretty easily. Notice here I'm just putting in the next column over, I just calculate the sample standard deviation for each of those rows. So here this first one is the standard deviation for my first sample that's in the first row. 2 and 2, that's going to be 0 because these numbers are the same. So there's no difference between them. There's no spread in the sample there. They're both the same value. And I can actually take this value, this equation here, the formula that I typed into this cell, and if I click on this, just not a click, but just put my cursor over this little box that you see here in the corner, my cursor will actually change to a different kind of cross. I can then hold down the left key on my mouse and then move it down, and it'll copy that same formula down for each of my individual rows. So that's the first step that I need to do. And then I'm going to, after using that stevdev function, I'm going to actually take these numbers and I'm going to have to sort them out. So the best way to do that is, we're going to see here in a little minute, I'm going to actually have to take those and copy them into a different column in order to sort them out right. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the values here, I'm going to select them, and then I'm going to copy them in the next column over, but I want just the values. So remember to copy with just the values and not everything. We don't want the formulas. We just want the values. And then I'm going to, after I paste those values over into the next column, I'm going to select these values here in column E, and then I'm going to actually select sort, which is found in the data menu ribbon. And Excel naturally wants you to sort everything that's next to it. You don't want to do this, okay? So just select that you're going to continue with the current selection, and then the default selection is to organize from smallest to largest. That's what you want. Go ahead and click OK, and you see that it transforms there and becomes the same type of results that we saw with the results window in StatCrunch when we were doing it earlier. So now it's easy to just take the same numbers there and put them into my probability distribution table. The first value listed there is 0, so I'm going to put that here first. There's 3 of them out of 9 total, so that's going to be 3/9, which I can reduce to 1/3. The next number that's listed is the 1.41, so I'm going to put that next. Its probability is 2/9 because there's 2 of them out of 9 total, and I could just fill in the rest of the table like we've seen previously. I can again check my answer to make sure all my probabilities add up to 1, and they do. So there's my probability distribution table. The next part of the problem asks to find the mean of the sampling distribution of the sample standard deviations. So for each of those sample standard deviations we calculated, we need to get the mean value. That's easy to do, just use the average function. So listed down here with each of these values that I calculated, I'm going to just click this cell down here and put in this formula for the average of these cells up here, and that comes out to be 1.88 as we saw earlier when we used StatCrunch. Again, you can do this in StatCrunch as we've seen, but StatCrunch has those extra steps that you need to put in. So this is another reason why I like Excel. It's just because I know how to manipulate things here in Excel, I can get to my answer a lot quicker. If, however, you're more comfortable doing this in StatCrunch, by all means, go with the StatCrunch. And then, of course, the last part of our problem asks us to compare the numbers. And here we've got a pretty significant difference here between our values. And so we're going to say sample standard deviations do not target the value of the population standard deviation. We would expect that because standard deviations are biased estimators. Again, I want to reiterate, you need to memorize that list of biased and unbiased estimators when answering this type of question, because sometimes, because the samples that you're going to be using in your problems are small, sometimes these numbers will come out to be pretty much the same for a bias estimator. So if all you do is compare the numbers to see if they're biased or unbiased, there's a probability there that you're going to get the wrong answer out. And that's why I always recommend students to memorize that list and go off the list. Here we're dealing with standard deviation. Standard deviations are biased estimators. So even if these numbers were the same, I would come back and say, no, they do not target. In general, the sample standard deviation does not make a good estimator of the population standard deviation because it's a biased estimator. And that brings us to the end of this mini lecture. I hope you found it helpful. You can find more mini lectures for this and other courses at AspireMountainAcademy.com. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.